Hello, everyone. Good evening, according to IST at least. I am Mouli, and I welcome you all to the third Young Scholars Exposure event. And today we have two very special people on our reviewers panel. We have once again with us Dr. Sulalit Bandyopadhyay. He's been here before. So it's a great pleasure to have you back, Dr. Bandyopadhyay. Dr. Sulalit Bandyopadhyay is a JB scholar from the year 2006. He earned his PhD in chemical engineering, and he is currently an associate professor at NTNU. He is employed as a researcher at the Department of Water Management, TU Delft, Netherlands. He is currently also a member of the operative group for the Gemini Center within Hydrometallurgy, HYPROS. It's good to have you, Dr. Bandyopadhyay. Our second reviewer on the panel today is Dr. Rudra Dutta. Dr. Dutta is a JB scholar from the year 1987. He received his PhD in computer science from North Carolina State University, USA in the year 2001. From 1993 to 1997, he worked for IBM as a software developer and programmer in various networking related projects. Since the year 2013, he has been a professor at North Carolina State University. And since 2018, he has been serving as an associate department head on an interim basis. His research interests focus on design and performance optimization of large networking systems, internet architecture, wireless networks, and network analytics. Dr. Dutta, it's great to have you. Without any further delay, let's move on to the main event. Before I introduce my speakers, let me tell you the format for today's event. So each speaker is going to get 20 minutes to present his talk. And after that, it'll be followed by a very brief Q&A session for about 5 minutes, followed by the review session. We have two speakers today, Mr. Prithwish Jana and Dr. Debarghya Sarkar. Our first speaker is going to be Prithwish. He's going to give us a talk titled Counterfactual Fairness in Machine Learning. Prithwish is a JB scholar of the year 2016. He is currently pursuing an M.Tech in computer science and engineering from IIT Kharagpur. And he is active you can get started and you can start sharing your slides.
Okay, thank you. Sharing. So is my screen visible?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So good
Okay.
evening, everyone.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Prithwish. Dr. Dotto is not yet present. We hope that he will join us soon. But I think Prithwish can go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So good evening, everyone. I am Prithwish, and today I'll talk about counterfactual fairness in machine learning. So let's start the presentation. Also, I'm a bit ill now, so my voice may be a bit down. So please pardon me for that. So we will touch upon these topics. We will start with the need of fairness in making predictions. We will then move forward to causal models and its use in counterfactuals, and how different counterfactual effects play a role in total variance. Finally, we will conclude with how to build a fair classifier. We will also go through some philosophical aspects that should be kept in mind while building such counterfactually fair classifier. So in recent times, AI and its application through machine learning is in huge demand in nearly all sectors of everyday life, say computer vision, biomedical engineering, robotics, banking, healthcare, everywhere. And we are getting used to automations, like it or not. So automation is useful, for example, to make predictions like future price of item, future defaulters based on credit history, etc. Nowadays, even in decision to hire a person for a job or even for predictive policing to identify potential criminal activity. Now all these have a similarity. They analyze massive amount of information, they identify data patterns that even human can perceive, but there's a problem here. So what if it starts predicting based on a sensitive attribute? Say for example one's race, gender, or even disability status. These can give rise to some legal and ethical consequences or even privacy beyond control. So as for example, the news article snapshots at the right, to mention a few, photo categorization software of Google Photos labeled black people as gorillas in 2015. More recently, in a football match at Scotland few months back, and AI camera kept mistaking the referee's bald head for a ball, ruining the game for fans. So we are seeing such algorithmic bias more and more in recent times. In general, a model can be said to be fair if it behaves similar in one, the actual world, and two, a counterfactual world, where uh, after interchanging the sensitive attributes. So some definitions now. Let A be the set of protected attribute of an individual, for example, gender, race, etc. These must not be discriminated against. And let X be the set of other observable attribute, for example, rank in an entrance exam or past grade. And let U be the set of relevant latent attributes which are not observed. For example, genetic structure is a latent attribute that affects protected attribute gender. Finally, Y is the outcome to be predicted and Y hat is the predictor. Predictor may be a machine learning algorithm that predicts Y. So in the past, fairness have been defined majorly through the following four conditions. First, fairness through unawareness. An algorithmic is fair as long as no protected attribute is explicitly used in decision making process. Second, individual fairness. An algorithm is fair if it gives similar predictions to similar individuals. Third, demographic parity. The acceptance rate for each protected demographic class should be similar. Finally, equality of opportunity. So let's say there is a preferred group A whose membership confers added advantage to a person. The metric check states that people who should qualify for an opportunity are equally likely to do so regardless of their group membership. So now we take a process-based approach to causality and define a general structural causal model, that is SCM. So it has four components: V, U, F, and P of U. So here set V corresponds to the observed or measurable variables. This may also include the protected attribute. Next, we have a set U of latent or unobserved variables in the system. So U and V basically partitions the total variable set. Next, F is the set of functions corresponding to each Vi. So each function Fi takes two arguments, the subset of observables Pai and the subset of unobservables Upai. Finally, P of U is the probability distribution over the latent variables, and each such SCM induces a directed acyclic graph. So let's take an example now. Let's say that V is a set of observed variables, U is the set of unobserved variables, and there are two functions, one for D and E. Since A or B are observed parents of D, there are two edges, A to D and B to D. C is an observed argument for function of E, so there's an edge from C to E. Also, the intersection between unobserved parent of D and E is not empty. They share a latent common variable U, so there is a bidirectional edge between D and E. Putting this together, we get the causal diagram on the right. So we use a causal model as a representational tool for exploring the space of alternative causal hypotheses. Here the world is described in terms of random variables or categorical values, uh, random random variables, and the random variables are either exogenous or endogenous. So first, coming to the exogenous variables, these are the independent variables and can be determined by factors outside the causal model. On the other hand, endogenous variables are dependent. They may be dependent upon other exogenous or endogenous variables. And each SCM induces a causal diagram whose nodes represent a random variable. So the edges represent a direct causal relation between them. And it may be noted that exogenous variables have no incoming edge upon them, as in the diagram here. So some examples: in the Berkeley admission problem, students apply for a university admission. That's variable Y equal to admitted and zero otherwise. Their genders are also recorded to monitor discrimination. So in this SCM, U variables are unobserved and A is the gender, a protected attribute. And the data reveals that female applicants have lower probability of admission compared to male. But the question is this data sufficient to conclude that female students were discriminated against? Another example is of predicting criminal reoffense based on age, previous conviction, and race is recorded to monitor discrimination. This is a possible structural model shown here. The notable thing here is that A and Z don't have any observable parents. But interestingly, unobserved variable U is shared between A and Z, explaining some correlation between race and age in at least this level of granularity. So finally, here also it was found that false positive rate of predicting reoffense is higher for non-white. Again, question is there any discrimination? Two more examples: predicting probability of accident and unobserved factor U corresponding to the aggressive driving that on one hand causes the drivers to be more likely to have an accident, and on the other hand causes individuals to prefer red cars. So moreover, non-white people have more probability to drive red car. So observing real data through SCM shows that non-white people are more accident prone, which is not which may not be true in reality. So again the question is, was there any discrimination? And finally, the last example is of predicting salary based on age, education level, and employment. So the causal diagram is shown. It was observed that female applicant has had less probability of higher income. So again, any discrimination? So now all these examples can be represented by a generic model of causal diagram as shown on the left. So usually four sets of variables. The protected attribute are shown in red and can be gender, race, etc. Demographic variable are on the other set of observables that are not protected. The set W is the set of mediator and outcome is variable Y. So in the right, we can see the causal fairness framework pipeline from beginning to end. In the first step, we acknowledge existence of a SCM. Next, we articulate the target measure of the fairness based on social or illegal context. We collect data in the third step from past decisions, and then we construct a causal graph from the underlying SCM. Finally, we calculate the empirical measure based on the data and causal graph. So now we analyze the demographic disparities. In the example on the right, age and nationality are the demographic variables. Education and employment are the mediators. Gender is a protected attribute, and Y is the salary. So we saw previously that there was an observed disparity when we move between the genders. The variation can be explained in different ways. Basically, these are the A to Y paths in the causal diagram. So one possible way is that maybe the algorithm directly discriminates based on gender, that it predicts less salary for a particular gender. Another possible explanation is that age or marital status is used for salary and gender is used to infer the marital status. And the third possibility is that the salary decisions were based on education or employment. And now education or employment may be affected by gender in the society. So some of these paths may be acceptable, some not. So we need to disentangle these individual variations. Now counterfactual. So from English dictionary, it normally defines statements like had it been something. To define it in our context, we first define potential response. Let's say we have two sets of variables A and Y. The potential response of Y is the solution of Y by substituting f of A with a constant, say small a, in the SCM. So counterfactual is the same thing as potential response. It is the value of Y that would have been obtained had the variable A been replaced by a constant for a particular unit U. Now we go through some of the effects brought about by counterfactual on the example of USA average earnings. The first is called the counterfactual direct effect. It is defined like this. So say for a male person, we would like to know that how his salary changed had he been a female while keeping his age, education, nationality unchanged. So unchanged as in same as that of a male. So the variation due to this is represented by CDE, and this can be understood from the graphs below. The right side graph at the bottom is the actual world where the three variables y, z and w equal to a naught, that is a male, and the left one is a counterfactual world where only for y, that is the salary, a equal to a1, that is a is a female, and the other links are kept unchanged. That is, for the sake of z and w, a is still a male. The symbolic notation of both these worlds are shown at the bottom of the graph. So you can see that only the value of the first subscript is different. This determines that only A to Y connection got changed. Now counterfactual indirect effect. So it is defined like this for an for the example of the USA earnings example. So for a male person, how would his salary wise change had his education and employment been at the level of a female person, keeping other demographic parameters unchanged? So the variation due to this is represented by CIE as in the formula shown. This can be understood from the graphs below too. Like the right side graph at the bottom is the actual world, where for three variables y, z and w a equal to a naught, that is a male. The left one is a counterfactual world where only for w perspective, that is education and employment, a equal to a1, that is a is a female, and the other links are kept unchanged. Finally, the last effect, the counterfactual spurious effect. For the USA earnings example, it will be defined as for a male person, that is a equal to a naught, and a female person, a equal to a1. How would his salary by differ had both been a male person? So how do we represent this? The right side graph at the bottom is the actual world where the person is naturally equal to a naught, that is a male. The left one is a counterfactual world where only for the Z perspective, that is age, nationality, a equal to a1, that is a is a female. But for Y and W side, a equal to a naught, that is still a male. Finally, to sum up, the total variation in y when we move between the genders can be written as difference between expected value of y for a1 and a0. This is just the difference of y values for the two causal diagrams. So we add two zero terms to this, that is add and subtract the same value. After rearranging the terms, we can group them into three sets. And the expected values of this is just the direct effect minus indirect effect minus spurious effect. Now under the SCM model, the direct, indirect and spurious effect values can be estimated from the observed data of past decisions, the empirical measures estimated on the right hand side at the functions of data. So putting these in the equations of previous slide, we can get proportion of variation contributed by each of the three effects. Now coming to a fair classifier. So we take a data set of individual features, their prediction labels and sensitive attributes. We feed the causal model M that best describes the data at hand. And for any individual data point, we'll compute any unobserved variable in the causal model. And then we'll use a predictor. So like any features that are not descendants of the sensitive variables and the unobserved variables. The predictor will thus be counterfactually fair. Finally, we'll return the best predictor. Yes, so now that we have discussed about algorithm to build a fair classifier, let's delve into some problems that can arise. So fairness in machine learning systems can be primarily considered in relation to group or an individual level. To achieve group fairness, a statistical measure must compare. Yes, to achieve group fairness, the statistical measure must compare a predictor's behavior across demographic groups. So, and seeks for approximate equivalence across the group. On the other hand, a measure of individual fairness must compare a predictor's behavior across similar individuals. And for this, use of causal modeling is among the most popular. Now to put it from a higher level, a fair predictor should give same prediction for an individual if he is from a different protected attribute. Let's take an example. Say Nora is a Latin girl who has a $40,000 salary and her request for a loan was denied by an automated system. A counterfactual explanation for this denial can be if Nora's annual income had been $60,000, she would have received the loan. Another counterfactual explanation can be if Nora had been Latina and she would have, if Nora had been Latina, then she would have not received the loan. Thus, we make assumptions about different versions of Nora and then trust the validity of the explanation. So these are some philosophical concerns that arise when we try to consider a counterfactual world. First, we need to specify all social categories and what it belongs to and what it means to not belong to a category. So say for example, defining race of a person is difficult because according to the geobiological essentialism perspective, it states that race has been used throughout history to show domination. The visual differences like skin color, hair texture, and eye form are inherited that are due to geographical and biological reasons. On the other hand, the social constructivist perspective believes race is nothing natural, but it should be present to do away with social injustice across classes. Now, another thing is that we need to choose a counterfactual world which is similar to at least some actual world scenario. So for example, we have a counterfactual. If President Nixon has pressed the red button, then there would have been a nuclear holocaust. This is true if and only if in some actual world Nixon actually pressed the button and there was a nuclear holocaust. But such a world is far from reality. So these are some difficulties faced in judging counterfactual world. To tackle these problems we just encountered, these suggestions were put forward in a recent paper. So these are a set of detailed set of tenets or principles to check and reflect upon before applying counterfactual to fair machine learning. So following these would enable designers to state unspecified and implicit assumptions. It also suggests path to researchers for seeking a variety of justifications in seeing the social world through counterfactual lens. Thus, one can become aware of some potential harms and disadvantages of making sense of fairness and explanations counterfactually. So to conclude, we went through a relatively newer model of fairness known as counterfactual fairness. By using this, instead of simply ignoring protected attribute, algorithms are able to take into account the different social biases. These biases could have aroused based on the ethically sensitive attributes. Also, here fairness is regulated by explicitly modeling the causal structure of the world. Criteria based purely on probabilistic independence cannot satisfy this, and thus are unable to address how fairness is occurring in the task at hand. And nowadays, counterfactual are increasingly being applied in machine learning to design fair and explainable algorithms. And regardless of which evaluation approach to counterfactual one takes, there is a set of principles that should be followed, as we discussed. So this helps to conduct interdisciplinary conversation between philosophers and the ML researchers, and one can become aware of the potential harms to the social world. So these are the references, and thank you.
Thank you, Prithwish. Thank you for your talk.
Thank you.
And we have a question for you from Orgoda. So I'll just read it out. You can also refer to it in the chat box.
Okay.
Orgoda asks, when you try to reduce bias in the algorithm, do you ask the CDE, CIE, etc. questions from the algorithm to the data and then take the decision?
Yes, actually, these things, CDE and CIE, these are based upon the problem we are handling currently. So as for example, this one, the USA average earning, first we need to construct the SCM, and then according to data we can get various distributions, like the probability distributions like these. These are some examples. These we will get from the data. And finally, uh, like the steps we discussed here. So first we will form the SCM. This is according to some philosopher's perspective for a given problem. And then after collecting data, we will construct the causal diagram. And from that, we will get the CIE and CSE values.
Orgoda, does that answer your question?
Oh, yes, thanks. I had one more extension to this question. Can I ask that?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I was wondering if a causal model that you were trying to explain, if that can have more than one philosophers.
Like more than one ideas.
Let's say I have a different idea of like the questions that you are asking and the answers that you are trying to find, like these in this SCM model, the philosopher, the idea that you explained,
Yes.
maybe like two philosophers have two different ideas. Are those can those be encountered in one model, or are those like different models? And as far as I understood, the algorithm is more like data driven here. So
Yes.
is it like different models, SCM models, or can they be addressed in one SCM model?
Yes, that's exactly the problem we face here. So like we were discussing here, so we can define days like that. So this becomes different from different philosophers' perspective. So here are some rules that was discussed in a paper. So if the philosophers and machine learning developers sit across a table and they discuss like for this question, so what answer are we getting? and they should come at a, they should, yes, they should converge finally and to generate a single SCM model. Finally, a single SCM model is required.
Another silly question it might be, so which portion is I saw that's a great presentation, you have put all the references in each slides, but which portion is the one that you have contributed in this work? I did not understand properly, maybe I missed
This,
it.
this I have actually started studying in my M.Tech thesis project. So currently, from my side, there is no contribution, but
You were
I am studying
explaining the
different
whole
papers.
demography of this research field.
Yes, yes. I'm
Awesome,
studying
great
different
work.
papers and giving a demo.
Okay, thank you, Prithwish and Orgoda. If okay, there is another question from Tathagata. I'll read it out. Casual estimation often has issues with co-founded variables, which leads to overfitting. Are you also looking into any variable selection approach? Prithwish, if you can answer that.
This I have not studied at the moment, so I'll definitely look into it. So I have to look into it and
Okay, okay, no problem. So if there are no other questions, then I'll move on to the reviewers. Okay. So firstly, I would like to ask Dr. Bandyopadhyay, if you may kindly give us your opinion.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Thank you, Prithvish, for a very nice presentation, I would say. It's a very different topic than what I'm currently looking into, but your title was quite attractive. So I was all ears during the whole presentation. There are some general comments that I would like to start off with, and then some more specific comments on the whole topic. So first and foremost, it's maybe a question to start with. What was the target audience that you were thinking of when you prepared this presentation?
target audience is say those who are currently using machine learning as a black box type of thing. So they should look into what is happening. So like which inside the black box, which things are taken for the prediction. Say like we are predicting based on a protected attribute, gender, which should not happen. So so my point is that should be looked into instead of just treating it as a black box machine learning.
Yeah. Sorry, if I can rephrase my question, I was thinking about the audience that is in this forum or listening to your presentation is not all of us are not specialists in machine learning, but more generalists in various topics, as I was thinking. So, and I think the forum is also more to, on the basis of science and exciting research going on. So what I suggest very much is to kind of, before any presentation, is to have a chat with the coordinators and also find out the audience, because from my own background, I think it's a topic which is far away, but I thought I could give you some suggestions on where it could be linked to a more generalist audience than a specialist audience. Before coming to that, however, what I would like to say is that one general comment is that all your slides were really congested and you were spending very little time on each of the slides. And I was not sure if you wanted me to read through the slides or you wanted me to focus on a specific. You also didn't use much of this laser pointer available on PowerPoint or your the arrow button, the arrow that you often see. So you were moving from one part of the slide to another in a very short period of time. And it was difficult to know, what did you want your audience to do? Did you want your audience to listen to you or look at your slides and try to figure out which part you are talking about? So that's a very general comment almost for all your slides. What I really liked was that you had excellent practical examples that we are all kind of can relate ourselves to, starting from the salary example, starting from the Google Gorilla example. But what I felt was that I couldn't connect with the help of these examples as to what was the main objective of your talk. So you stated the examples at the very beginning of the talk, and that was very nice. So I was able to connect, okay, this has some real significance, because many of us who work on theoretical topics, it's very difficult to connect it to reality and explain. But your topic was one which has a real implication. But what was difficult for me to follow through is that how does it help me as an audience to understand the objective of the talk? And that kind of was brought back when Orko was asking the question about that was also one of my questions, what was your contribution to the work? And you then clarified that this is more of your going into the field and understanding what's there and kind of trying to make an opinion of the field. So that would have been very good if you clarified it at the beginning of the talk, that look, in this talk, I am going to introduce you to this field where it's mostly a presentation of thoughts from different previous researchers and current ongoing research. So that would have been much easier for me to, or anybody in the audience, to know where will the talk end, right? Because if you are setting up the expectation high that I will end with the best results I've got so far, or the questions that I've proved wrong, then you have kind of disappointed the audience at the end, because everyone is still looking for when is the climax coming, when is the peak of your talk coming. So it would be nice to keep that in mind. The other thing was that another technical thing was more on the, or presentation wise, is the use of colors, because your slides were very colorful. It's always good to remember that when you are presenting colors such as red, green, blue, there are many people in the audience who are not able to distinguish these colors together due to this color blindness. And also, if you have too much focus on your slides, as I believe that the slides are your tools to express your thought. But in your case, some of the expressions which you were referring to were so much in the content of the slide, it was difficult to follow what you were saying. So a balance between the two would be very, very nice. Okay. And the last point that I had presentation side was that if you started your like this organization of today's talk, you made this, right? You're going to go through this, you're going to talk about this, but it was difficult to follow your transitions between the different parts of your talk. So it is often a suggestion that you could put in something called a bumper slide. So it's basically a slide that is blank, absolutely blank, and just a heading for the next section coming up, or use a picture or just blank out, so that it's possible now to know, okay, you have moved from part A to part B, or part B to part C. Okay, so those are more or less the presentation technique wise. But what I was also, what I felt is that you are very dedicated and devoted to the topic. So your enthusiasm and your knowledge about the topic was coming out very nicely, which meant that the audience will always have a strong feeling or confidence in what you are saying. So it just needs to kind of put all your thoughts into a nice presentation and then reduce a lot of the content. So where you had lots of equations and lots of text, think about, should I just use the equations or should I just use the text? Because both of them don't go hand in hand, because you're explaining also something.
Yes. Yes.
Right. I guess those were my comments, but overall, the topic was really interesting, and the examples that you started off with, probably in future talks, we'll see that you're also rounding up those examples and yeah, putting them to use. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bandyopadhyay. Now moving on to a second reviewer, Dr. Dutta, if you could kindly give us your opinion.
Yes, certainly. Thank you. Am I well audible?
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely, sir.
Okay. So I I have to start with this, not with you, but with me. Apologizing to both of the presenters and all the organizers and everybody else here for being late, which is never pardonable. I am tempted to say that I was caught up in something important, but that would be a complete lie. The truth is that I was very stupid and I thought the 8 to 10 p.m. said 8:10 p.m. I wishfully thought that it was starting at 8:10. It's a weird time. Why would anybody start at 10 minutes past 8? I thought maybe some conflict from somebody. So just wanted to apologize at the outset and say that certainly was not intending to take it lightly or be late. And therefore, I missed the first few minutes of your talk. I think I joined about 5-6 minutes into the scheduled time. But I did hear most of it. So again, thank you so much for the talk. Like everybody else, I appreciate you giving this talk and the preparation. We're, I guess, already a little behind. Let me not try to take much time. It helps that Sulalit has, I think, hit on every single point that I noted down already. So I could just say +1 and be done here. But I'll try to pass on just my personal slant on it. So once again, nice presentation. There are ways I think it can be improved, which is always true of any presentation. And some of the things that I will point out are mistakes that I've been making presentations for, I don't know, 25, 30 years or more. And I still make them, even to this day. So ranging from, no particular order, very fine detail to very broad picture. Okay. So I am in computer science, but not in the AI or ML specialty or learning or anything like that. So therefore, perforce, my comments are going to be that of more a generalist, which also goes to a point already made. So I won't belabor. So I also thought that what I need to have a sense of is what is the positioning of this talk, who is the intended audience, and what is the intended outcome. And again, my fault for not joining at the very outset, but it does help to make that very, very clear. And I'll try to take a different slant at it because Sulalit has said that very nicely. But when we do science, technology, when we're doing research or teaching or anything, we don't think of it as a storytelling exercise, but it always is a storytelling exercise. The human mind thinks in narratives. If there is not a narrative, there is nothing to tell. So what is the story you're telling? That depends on the audience. Now, what are you trying to get out of it? So when Sulalit said that what is the audience or what is the purpose of this, right? So let me put it a different way. Somebody that you have not told this story to, once they hear your story and then they hear you out for 25 minutes or whatever it is, right? What would you like to have happened inside their minds that had not been the situation at the outset? What is the intended objective or the outcome? Now, this is the way that things can differ. So if it's research, it can be a proposal or a dissemination. If it is more tutorial content, not necessarily cutting edge research, then it can be tutorial or it can be a survey. And there can be many other finely distinguished types of presentations or written works of written archival. And the story is different in each of those cases. So in one case, if you are disseminating, it's mainly that, look, I have done this research and there is now knowledge that I can bring to you that you did not know before. And I wish you would take this knowledge and that we would all build on top of it. And by the way, give me credit when you use it because that's what we live on. So just remember you heard it here first. That's dissemination of research. But the research proposal is very different. In the research proposal, you can't say I've done any work because you haven't done any work. So the story is more like, this is very important. Don't you think we should know more about this? You do? Well, then give me money and I will do this research and then we will know more about it. That's if you're asking for funding. Sometimes you're asking for funding indirectly by trying to become a part of some group, to become somebody's student, etc. Right? Or just to convince somebody that you are already a student, that you should be allowed to remain a student. That's the PhD qualifier exam that all of us in academia are so very familiar with, right? So there, so if you will, right? Sometimes we do practice talks. So it's like, hey folks, my friends, I will be making this my exam talk. I need to practice the exam talk. At the exam talk, everybody will be intimately familiar with this research area. But for the practice talk, I just gathered up whoever I can, so nobody understands anything that I'm saying, but just tell me how it sounds like, and I'm just practicing. And that's perfectly fine as well. I would almost make that part of the story. I would start by saying that. So it's always, the audience is, you can be sort of take a distant standing with your audience, or you can come right in and be friends with your audience. And almost always the second one gives you some advantages, but you have to judge it case by case, certainly. Um, Last thing, two more things, sorry. Um, Micro comment. You use an alternative spelling of Bernoulli, and I, I would say that many people might stumble on that, right? Because the most generally accepted spelling is not that one. So, but clearly you are using an alternate spelling because it occurs like 5, 6 times and it's the same each time, right? So I'm saying if that is the prevalent spelling where you are presenting to your audience, then great. If not, just bow to the, whatever is norm, and use the spelling that will not cause most audience members to stumble, because otherwise that may be the most important thing that they walk away with, whereas it was the least important thing in the whole stuff. Do you understand what I'm saying? I live and work in America, so I use a lot of spellings that I was taught as wrong when I was growing up and learning English, but it's what I do, because otherwise we will spend 10 minutes at the end just talking about that. Oh, you spelled that with an S. I spell that with a Z. And I'm like, it's not a Z, it's a Z. They're like, no, it's not a Z, it's a Z. I don't need that discussion. It's no part of my life. Um, in terms of what Sulalit said about, making the slides less busy or do more of your work for you, one point I'd like to add is that animation sometimes can be a wonderful tool. Even if you have a comparatively busy slide, if you build it up in 4 or 5 steps of animation, so it starts out very simple, and then you start adding the various arrows and things, text to go with those arrows, the story can get told more effectively. Another point about examples. What is the purpose of providing an example, right? Examples typically serve one of two main purposes. One of them is to motivate. Oh, we need to de-bias AIs. Why? Nobody cares. Well, your friend could get a job in which they're paid less, or somebody else might become invisible on a Google search. Oh, now I am well motivated. So it's to motivate. Right? Another use of an example is to explain, right? So I give you a very complicated equation and you are like, okay, that's probably good math. I don't know. But then if I walk you through an example of that equation, now everything is much clearer, right? I think you effectively used your examples at the front end. Again, sorry for missing your absolute front end, but you use them effectively for the motivation purpose, less so in walking through. So it was quite a gear shift, I thought. So one slide was, I understood everything. This next slide, I understood almost nothing because I'm not in that area. So you're dealing with, squiggles and graphs, and even propositions have become things like A and B. Put a tiny proposition in there, right? Saying this person deserves a loan, or and that allows me to bridge across from the example. Now I do understand, my understanding is that you were presenting one after the other several research works that delineate this area in which you intend to continue research. in which case, obviously, you have to go with what they said. You can't just make up stuff, make up examples for them, perhaps, but still, as much as possible, try to thread it through for explanatory purposes. The last bit of advice, if you actually continue, suppose you're making this as a proposal research talk in India, you could try to see if you can draw Indian parallels. So, I mean, all of those things, you know, if somebody or other, if Nora was Latina, right? I will think of an Indian example in a matter of seconds. And if you are speaking to an Indian audience, it could hit them as at a different level altogether, if that's what you intend to do. And golly, took like 10 minutes or something. I will stop here and hand back to the organizers to see what's next.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Dutta, for putting it so wonderfully. Once again, I would like to thank Prithwish for his talk. In spite of being sick, like you said, get well soon. And without any delay, let's move on to our next speaker for the day. Our next speaker is Dr. Debarghya Sarkar. And let me begin by saying that he is one of the organizers of this event. So it's wonderful to have him speak today. Debarghya is a postdoctoral research fellow at Harvard University and General Hospital. His present research is on applications of semiconducting laser devices as intracellular biophotonic probes. His doctoral research was from he did it in the University of South California in May 2020, and it was on a novel heterogeneous semiconductor integration technique geared towards enabling future 3D integrated circuits. Yes, Debarghya, you can start.
Yeah, thank you, Mouli, for the introduction. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, and welcome to my talk. While I'm currently at Harvard, the research that I'm going to speak about today is that I performed as a PhD student at the University of Southern California. And the image that you see on your screens is that of an iconic building at the University of Southern California. And among the reasons that I put this up here, one of the primary ones is to remind ourselves that, you know, similar to how it would be some millennia back, that building such functionally and you know, constructively stable structure, multi-storied architecture was difficult. Similarly, today, it's equally non-trivial to construct functionally and structurally sound multi-storied integrated circuits known as 3D integrated circuits. So my PhD research has been on materials and device innovation as potential candidates for 3D integrated circuits. And in the next 20 minutes or so, I'll try to enthuse you with a brief story highlighting some of the major cornerstones of my journey in the 5.5 years of my PhD. So my PhD research has been a lot more of a team effort than I had expected when I first started my PhD. So I'll take a moment to acknowledge each and every one who has been an integral part of this journey. My research advisor, Professor Rehan Kapadia, all of the group colleagues that I've worked with have been a very important part of this process. Many mentors and collaborators at USC and beyond, as well as the different funding agencies who made the research go forward possible. Now, let's start with the question, why we need 3D integrated circuits? Well, the answer is that evolution of integrated circuits over the last 5 decades by device miniaturization, also referred to as Moore's law, in order to get high density 2D integration, is coming to an end. And one of the most accepted next generation architectures is that of a 3D integrated circuit, where there would be multiple levels of logic, communication, memory, etc., stacked on top of one another in the same chip to get high density integration. And ideally made of multiple materials, because different materials are uniquely suited for different applications. Now, when I say multiple materials, I necessarily include compound semiconductors. So what are compound semiconductors? Well, similar to elemental semiconductors like silicon, germanium, etc., which are in the group 4 of the periodic table, if you take elements from group 3 and group 5, such as indium and phosphorus, gallium and nitrogen, aluminum and arsenic, so on, or you take the elements from group 2 and group 6, then you form what are called compound semiconductors. And the compound semiconductors typically have much better intrinsic material properties than those of elemental semiconductors. And so they are strong contenders to be used as materials of choice for future 3D integrated circuits. Now, one of the primary challenges associated with 3D integrated circuits is assuming the first device layer is already on the chip, how to integrate the second and higher layers in order to get high performance devices in these top layers and at a temperature below 400 degrees Celsius, so that the underlying active layers are not affected. And this has been the holistic challenge that my PhD research has tried to explore. Now, the most popular current approach for 3D integrated circuits today is called hybrid bonding. In this method, materials are first grown on a single crystal growth substrate, and then this grown material is transferred to a host substrate to which it is bonded, and finally, devices are fabricated from it. Using this method, very high performance devices have been demonstrated, but at a very high cost, mainly arising from the expensive single crystal growth substrate and the non-scalability between the growth substrate and the host substrate. The other approach is called monolithic integration, where the host substrate is taken and materials are directly grown on top of the host substrate from which devices are fabricated. Now, as you might expect, this approach is more economic and scalable by orders of magnitude, but traditional vapor phase growth methods like MOCVD or MBE, when used to grow on amorphous substrates, which is essentially the topmost layer in an integrated circuit, that would lead to have polycrystalline material growth. And polycrystalline materials are unsuitable for high performance devices. And why is that so? Why are polycrystalline materials unsuitable? In other words, why should we need single crystal materials? Well, a simple example would be that if we, let's say, inject 50 electrons on one side of a device comprised of a single crystal material and expect to receive, let's say, 40 electrons on the other side, retaining the same velocity as in the injection side, then with the same experiment, we would possibly get 1 electron if we do that with a polycrystalline material, simply because there is a lot more scattering that happens at the grain boundaries. In other words, a polycrystalline material leads to having 40 to 50 times at least lower electron mobility than its single crystalline counterpart. And this has been the major impedance to realizing monolithic 3D integration in the past. Now, if we think about it from an engineering perspective, since the overall scheme of monolithic integration is economic and scalable, it is more commercially viable if we can change the status quo of getting polycrystalline materials to getting single crystal materials for high performance devices. So instead of working with the traditional vapor phase growth methods, we adapted this newly introduced growth technique called templated liquid phase growth, where it was demonstrated that indium phosphide films of good morphology and crystalline quality can be grown on inexpensive polycrystalline metallic substrates. In other words, even though the substrate is polycrystalline and unsuitable for electron transport, the material grown on top can be single crystalline and made usable for electron transport. So building on this, my PhD research first demonstrated growth of single crystal compound semiconductor mesas on diverse substrates. I'll give you an example using indium phosphide as a reference. So once again, indium phosphide is a 3,5 compound semiconductor. Indium is from the group 3 in the periodic table. Phosphorus is from the group 5 in the periodic table. So we start with indium mesas on a substrate capped with silicon oxide. And this entire structure is taken to a growth chamber where it's heated at a temperature above the melting point of indium, and phosphorus is introduced in the form of phosphine. Now, critically, this phosphine flux is controlled to ensure single nucleation in each template, so that with time, each nucleus grows as a single crystal until it consumes all of the indium and transforms it to single crystalline indium phosphide, so that the final structure is single crystalline indium phosphide mesa growing directly on an amorphous substrate. This is an indium phosphide nucleus growing in a pool of indium, gradually growing as a single crystal until it consumes all of the indium and transforms it to single crystalline indium phosphide, which in this case is of 6 micron diameter. Now, although I gave this example using indium phosphide as reference, it may be noted that it's not just indium phosphide that can be grown by this method. In fact, we have demonstrated a wide range of materials, such as indium arsenide, gallium phosphide, indium gallium phosphide, tin phosphide, and so on, and on a wide variety of substrates, including refractory metals, amorphous dielectrics like silicon oxide, silicon nitride, aluminum oxide, and so on, which are important materials for 3D integration, crystalline dielectrics, 2D materials like graphene, as well as flexible polymers like polyimide. And some specific examples from there, these shows different stoichiometries of indium gallium phosphide, stoichiometry controlled tin phosphide, as well as a lateral heterojunction between indium phosphide and tin phosphide. Also, growth on different substrates, such as growth of indium phosphide on crystalline gadolinium oxide, on amorphous titanium oxide, and on two-dimensional graphene transferred on silicon oxide. Now, before we move forward, it's important to take a step back and recognize that the translation from the growth on metals, which was previously demonstrated, to the growth on dielectrics, which was demonstrated in my PhD, is actually non-trivial. What I mean by that is, compared to this flat and nice film of indium phosphide growing on metallic molybdenum foil, when similarly tried to be done so on dielectric silicon oxide, the morphology is not maintained. When patterned on metallic molybdenum oxide, the shapes are retained as intended, but form holes when similarly tried on dielectric silicon oxide. The reason is that most of these dielectrics are indium phobic, causing indium to de-wet, reducing the surface area of contact when it is molten. To understand this phenomenon better and to see if we can have a control over the wetting propensity of different liquid metals on different substrates, we worked on a thermodynamic model where we calculated the Gibbs free energy of two different structures, one which we call the wetting pattern, where the liquid metal, such as indium, when it is molten, is wetting the entire surface area as intended. Another is a de-wetting pattern where it's not, instead a void is formed, similar to what was shown previously. And when we subtract the Gibbs free energy of one from the other, we get the Gibbs free energy formation of void as a function of the void radius and the template geometry. And when we plot that as a function of the void radius, we see that for a given thickness of indium, which in this case is 400 nanometers, For templates of radius denoted as RT, so for templates of radius 3 micron and 5 micron, Gibbs free energy of formation of void is positive for all values of void radius. In other words, thermodynamically, void formation is not possible for templates of radii 3 and 5 micron when the initial indium thickness is 400 nanometers. For the same thickness of indium, however, if we have templates 7 or 9 micron radius, then there are negative values of Gibbs free energy. In fact, there are certain energetic minima indicating that there are possible values of voids forming in these sizes, and there are certain void sizes which are most thermodynamically favored. Now, the major takeaway from this model for our growth purposes is that we would expect liquid metal templates to always wet a given substrate if they are patterned above a critical aspect ratio given by the height to the radius of the template. So to verify this, we performed an experiment where we patterned indium with the same thickness and different diameters. And we heated this up above the melting point of indium. And what we observed was that indeed, below a certain radius, indium templates stayed intact, whereas above that, they formed voids. And the size of the voids increased with the increase in the template radius, just as the model predicted. This is a comparison of the thermodynamic model with the experimental data for both indium and tin and on different substrates. The very good quantitative match indicates that the model is quite robust and reliable in predicting the wetting propensity of different liquid metals and on different substrates, so that we can utilize this knowledge to deterministically design different device geometries, grow them accordingly, and scalably fabricate devices with a knowledge of the substrate surface energy and the device intended characteristics. For example, here we have grown indium phosphide single crystals with lengths exceeding 100 micron and widths of 5 micron. And the fact that these indeed are single crystalline are evidenced by this technique called electron backscatter diffraction, where essentially individual colors represent a single crystal orientation. So the fact that each of these 6 devices has the same color throughout indicates that they are indeed single crystalline. We were also able to grow indium phosphide directly on a silicon nitride ring resonator, which are important components for photonic circuits. And this was grown only on top of the silicon nitride and all conformally all around the ring. The very good interfacial properties is evidenced by this plot, which shows the photoluminescence from indium phosphide coupled with the cavity resonances given by the spikes of the resonator. Speaking of photoluminescence, this plot shows a typical photoluminescence of the indium phosphide grown by the TLP method, given by the red curve, and is compared with that of a commercially available single crystal indium phosphide wafer, given by the black curve. As can be seen, the peak position and full width half maxima of these two curves are pretty similar, indicating that the TLP grown materials have optoelectronic quality similar to that of gold standard commercially available single crystal wafers. Indium arsenide grown by this method has electron mobility of about 6,000 centimeters squares per volt second, measured at room temperature. To put it into perspective, this is a compilation of the highest electron mobilities measured from different material families directly grown on an amorphous substrate. As can be seen, the TLP grown materials have higher electron mobilities than all of them. In fact, the TLP grown indium arsenide has the highest electron mobility, being about 2 orders of magnitude higher than the majority. Also importantly, this TLP indium arsenide was grown at a temperature of 300 degrees Celsius, and all of the device fabrication was done at or below 300 degrees Celsius, which is well within the thermal threshold of 400 degrees Celsius set by 3D integration requirements. So I can claim with some confidence that TLP semiconductors are therefore important contenders to be used for 3D integrated circuits in future. So in summary, my PhD research has tried to answer some questions and tried to explore and establish potential methods to achieve multifunctional high-performance devices and materials at a temperature below 400 degrees Celsius for 3D integrated circuits and flexible electronics applications. Thank you, and I'll be open for questions now or later.
Thank you, Debarghya. I will just give the audience a minute or so in case there are any queries. In fact, if there's anyone who wants to ask a question, can please go ahead and unmute yourself. Okay. Since there are
rather nice question.
Yes.
So I was wondering where, in terms of the commercialization, scale production, where or how far out this is, or is this currently, this research was your PhD research, you said, so it's not what you're doing at the moment. So maybe it's already in commercialization or industrialization, or is it 20 years out or ballpark?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. Yeah, thank you for the question, Rudra. So essentially, I would say the answer is not very linear. We were in not a collaboration, but we were a part of a consortium called the Semiconductor Research Corporation, and Intel is part of that. And we know that they have tried, they are trying to utilize it in their some generation architecture. So it's in a research domain at Intel, let's say. Now, this is one of the many approaches currently that has been put forward for 3D integrated circuits. Of course, in my opinion, this is definitely not going to be the first one that's going to come out. There are, even though they are not the best, eventually best in every aspect, there has been sufficient advance made by hybrid bonding. And I personally feel that there are avenues that hybrid bonding would be available commercially, whether or not in logic circuits, but definitely in some other applications. In photonic circuits specifically, I think we should be able to see some applications soon. However, in terms of scalability, I mean, this idea of having a 3D integrated circuit is actually quite old, more than 30, 40 years old, and integrating multiple materials to get different functionalities is also, it's pretty much from the time that people started using solid state transistors. But the difficulty has been the ability to integrate different materials because of some of the reasons that I mentioned today. So it has not been possible. And so the fact that we still have not seen even hybrid bonded circuits tells that the path is not very easy. And honestly, when I go to conferences, the consensus is that there is no clear answer even among the industry leaders. Everything actually is being tried, and both of these are more or less equal contenders to be used sometime in future. This specific technology, to circle back to your question specifically, this specific technology, as I mentioned, I know that it is being tried out. It has been tried out, and it's, I don't know the details. They don't divulge the details. They learn from us and do their own stuff. But I know that they are on it. Whether or not this would be scalably possible and commercially made depends on them and others, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. Debarghya, there is a question for you in the chat box. You can read from there, and I'll read it out for the rest of the audience. Can single crystal growth be better done in zero gravity, like in space station?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I've never thought of this before. I'm trying to currently think of why maybe it may not be possible at all. Kind of thinking the other way around, but I guess, I mean, essentially we need to so when it's the competition to grow a single crystal versus when it turns out to be a polycrystal, if I, let's say, go back to my slide here. So the key is that we need single nucleation site within the area that we would want the single crystal to be grown, and no other nucleation site. Now, I don't know if gravity really plays a role, because here the forces such as van der Waals force or other atomic forces are more dominant than gravitational force. Having said that, there are definitely the shapes of the templates would be influenced. For example, to whatever extent these shapes, like there are currently these shapes are held together by the silicon oxide and the substrate kind of with a capillary force. So once again, it's a different force, not really gravity again playing a role, because even if we tilt, the fluid doesn't really flow out of these structures. So I currently do not think that there will be a significant benefit in having single crystal growth done in zero gravity. Also, yeah, and the fact that the issue that the competing factors that lead to polycrystalline growth versus single crystal growth are more of microscopic defects that happen on the substrate, which act as nucleation sites, which are energetically more favorable to nucleate than to grow an already existing nucleus. So as of now, I don't really think there is a specific advantage to growing single crystals in zero gravity than on Earth.
Okay. So Orgodha has another question for you. So he's saying that his question is along the same lines as that of Dr. Dotto. Is the idea going to help in building a better computer soon? You said multi-layered architecture, maybe breaking memory RAM buffers architecture, question mark, or are they orthogonal to what you presented? If you could answer that.
Yeah, no, it's very related. In fact, I didn't present today, but some of my work also touched upon what's currently popularly known as neuromorphic computing. So using these materials growth methods and devices, we demonstrated neuromorphic computing architecture, like specifically the synapse architecture, and different learning mechanisms that have not been demonstrated before using a single device architecture. So I would say they are very interrelated, and there would be different levels of application of, let's say, this technology in different avenues. So this better computer architecture, first of all, this is going to happen because we already currently are at the limit. Very recently, IBM came up with this 2 nanometer pitch, nanosheets architecture, and maybe 1 nanometer, but that's it. Essentially using the current logic architecture of a computer as a whole. By logic, I mean logic, just the device from a individual device perspective. The cells of the computer, if you might call them, the transistors. That architecture needs to be changed because it's at the limit beyond which there will be quantum effects dominating. And so the method of electron transport and using that knowledge or characterizing that to understand zeros and ones will no longer be valid. So this is the three-dimensional architecture is the next step in order to go to a higher integration. Neuromorphic computing is also another paradigm. Even if it's a two-dimensional architecture, it's a completely different architecture of computational units altogether. So it's not entirely orthogonal. It's also not, but they are also not necessarily dependent on each other. So they can both be, they are both being tried. And my perspective, my take is that with the advancement that I've seen in the recent past during my PhD, I think neuromorphic computing architectures are going to become more commercially viable sooner. In fact, there are, of course, as you already know, there are neuromorphic chips available from Intel, such as Loihi, from IBM, like True North and so on, but those are made using the logic transistors that are currently used to power your computers. The change that will happen is that each neuron or each synapse are simulated, are made using 12 or more individual transistors. The next generation of neuromorphic chips would be a single transistor. It'll not be a logic or a switch transistor. It'll be an analog transistor or a combination of transistor, capacitor, resistors, etc. So a different architecture, but still a single device to reduce the footprint, and use that. Another name for neuromorphic computing is memory computing and memory architecture. So that's definitely going to happen. But for so yeah, I mean it's at some level they are coupled, but at the same time they are not entirely dependent on each other. And a 3D integrated circuit, of course, goes more than just logic or memory computing. It also includes, let's say, sensing. You can have an individual chip, which would be an IoT device, and so different functionalities. So even though the integration of multiple devices to have logic being carried out as required on your computer, let's say to stream videos, is not necessary, but sensing and transmitting information, all of them can be coupled in a device, which is not taken in neuromorphic computing chip, but is something that 3D integrated circuit is looking at. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah.
Yes.
So I think there's another question from Smriti. By using 3D IC, we are saving some area on the 2D, that is the horizontal plane, and using that area on the 3D vertical axis. Won't this mean that circuit boards will become larger in the vertical dimension? Would that cause any disadvantage?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So essentially, I think from a very broad perspective, how I may answer this question in two ways. From a broad perspective, would that cause any disadvantage? Sure. I think any technological advancement, we engineers are probably born to solve some problems, and that creates even more problems. And then there will be another generation of engineers who will solve those problems. So yes, there could be some disadvantages. Now, however, let's say as we are looking at it now, the extent of this, so as you mentioned that we are currently using a two-dimensional plane, and if we go to 3D, we'll be using more in the third dimension. So the circuit boards will become larger in the vertical dimension. The thickness currently is much smaller, and so you'll probably not be able to really tell. The main area or the main volume is occupied by packaging. The chips themselves, like within the current, even with all of the layers, they are whatever thickness that is. Even if you add 1 or 2 or 3 more layers, that will not be significant for you to understand really in terms of the volume consumption. However, there are other aspects, and I did not mention them at all in my talk because I set the premise of the talk saying one of the primary challenges of 3D integrated circuits, but there are many. Of course, similar to, and this goes back to the first image that I showed, that it's non-trivial to make multi-storied buildings, multi-storied integrated circuits in this case. And if you think about it, it's not, at some point, it was not trivial. What we take for granted today, it was not trivial to make multi-storied buildings several centuries back. And which means that if we try to translate that to integrated circuits, it means that there needs to be communication between the layers. There needs to be a different kind of heat sinking that needs to be done so that chips don't burn themselves out, and a lot other problems. So the thing is that we human race are quite greedy, if we might put it that way, or we might say that, yeah, that's what we would like to make human race progress. So we are not satisfied with what we have, and we would like to get more. So that's why we need to build. We are at the limit of what we can achieve using two-dimensional area. We have to build taller buildings in the three-dimensional space, and we'll have to design our bigger devices like laptops and circuit boards and phones, etc., whatever is needed to incorporate that. Let's say, yeah.
Okay, so I think we will move on to the reviewers now. Dr. Dutta, going to you first. If you could let us know your opinion about the Debarghya's talk. Please.
Sure. And I'll try to keep it brief. Once again, thank you very much, Debarghya, for the talk. Very, very nice talk. And I think that, I mean, if I don't quite understand AI and machine learning, this is far, far afield for me. So this is, I believe there are such things as chips, but I haven't ever seen them. So the fabrication. So still, I understood quite a lot of what you were saying, and that's right there. That shows that it's aimed fairly well. I think the talk was delivered, very nicely, prepared, thoughtfully, sized and directed to a particular audience of generalist, science interested, science students, science researcher kind of people, engineers. Not necessarily that I would get as much out of it as an actual person working in your field would, but that I get enough out of it as well. So, good balance. So all the things that you do right in this talk, I will not speak about it because it'll need almost as long a talk to explain that motivation and stuff like that. So what can I say? Well done. It's well practiced by now, obviously. This was your doctoral research, and at your point of life, not only have you made many presentations, you have made multiple versions of this particular work, probably. I'm sure your PhD defense was much longer, and you have compressed it down to this. At this point, so now always looking for the next level. So in no way, detracting, purely as suggestions in case it should be of use to you. I provide these thoughts. You could perhaps, not just in this company, but in this kind of context, in this sort of presentation of your work, you could maybe afford to put a little bit more of yourself in there, to put a bit more personal stories or backgrounds or passion. You started with no hints in the bullets. You started on your very title slide with that, saying it was almost more of a team effort than I would have believed a PhD thesis could be. And that's that was, that's different from everything else you said in the talk. And it occurs to me that you could do a little bit more of that, inject more. So this is to people in your area of specialization, I imagine this is wildly exciting. But if you move further away from the field, It's like, oh, more magic these people are doing. I don't know, sounds a little dry. So at that point, and you could put in a lot more math and transference equations and things like that, I bet, but you didn't, which is appropriate. But what you could put in is, exactly how big this day was to you, or how disappointing that other thing was when you saw the, indium whatnot, kind of behave like the layering on milk instead of whatever it is. So, and two, your ongoing journey may have nothing very clearly to do with this in your mind, because it's like a total gear shift from here to here. But again, sitting from where I am, you're in the same field. You're somewhere in that same ballpark. So the continuing journey of Bungalow Bill, sorry, bad Beatles reference. So the continuing story, not just for you, but for the world, which we got into a little bit with the questions, is also something that could help engage audience even more, if it is possible. Your talk was already very engaging. I'll just stop with that. I don't believe I have any more to impart that you don't already know. Thank you.
Thank
you,
you very
Dr.
much.
Datta. Yeah. Moving on to Dr. Bandyopadhyay. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much, Debarghya, for an engaging presentation, I must say. And I guess, as Dr. Datta also mentioned now, that this was a really mature talk compared to the other talk in this session, and for all the reasons that we know about, that PhD is never the easiest journey. So there have been a lot of back and forth and ideas, and also you referred back to your own publications in the talk, and that speaks for all the content and the flow and everything. I would rather make some more specific comments, since Dr. Datta made more general and overview, very nice comments to those. But to add on to that is that you had a very engaging welcome, and that's also part of the reason that you are not yourself in India, and helps in kind of looking at it from an outside perspective, that there are people all over the world probably listening to this. So it was very nice there. What I really liked is that you said it, I'm going to tell you the story of my PhD journey. And I agree very much with Dr. Dutt that a personal insight there throughout would have been really nice. And one thing I was thinking that could have been great is that you might have been fabricating this in a clean room setup, or in a fabrication setup. So some cool sciencey images with you in those spacesuits and working on, could have been lovely to kind of engage the audience more. And that would have also shown that why you deserve the first authorship in the paper that you do deserve, although it's a team effort, and we know in the bigger picture that research is more and more team-based. But a personal insight there would have been really nice. And it's something to point out also that there are two ways and of starting to acknowledge the team efforts. In your case, you did it at the very beginning, where people are probably the most attentive, than towards the end, where people know that you will see a slide with lots of names and lots of collaborators. So that was nice, and I've seen people do that back and forth. So that was also good. Now, more critical comments maybe is you had this talk was more closer to what I am aware of, and terminologies and what we are working on, more on nucleation and growth. So this fitted quite nicely, but in a very different perspective and different application. So when you refer to this periodic table, and again, this is very minor comment, but things to improve on for the long part of it, is that you showed the very big periodic table, and you looked at a certain group, and you wanted to focus at a certain area. So what I would have done is that I would have taken out the whole of the periodic table and just had those, because it did not mean that the rest of the periodic table still needs to be in place. So again, this is a minor comment, but it can help kind of make the audience focus, because if people are generalists, as are in this, then they might be looking at, when you are saying group 3, group 4, might be also looking at the other groups and trying to find out what they are, right? Because you have a lot of unnecessary things on the slide at that point. You use some terms, MOCVD and MBE, and towards the very end, you use the TLP. It's nice to have abbreviations, but if you want to use them, then please mention them at the very beginning, because suddenly I thought, oh, what was TLP again? And this is not a written paper, so I can't Control+F. So I have to just imagine that it was templated liquid phase growth, and probably that was it. So there were some abbreviations that could have been done. What I really liked, again, on the positive side, was that you had nice transition from what is known in the literature to what you have done. And what Dr. Dutta also mentioned, that you were trying to kind of focus or squeeze in a long PhD work into a 15 minutes presentation. And I think you did great because you had the references up there. So, and I know that those references would carry much more detail than what you're presenting today. So anybody interested could go back and look at it. So it was very nice that these were made available on the respective slides. Then at the end, when you don't know, if you have a bunch of references, then I'm thinking, okay, should I go through all the references or just one of them? So this was a good way. When it comes to images, in several slides, your image size has been very nice and very easy to read and where you would want us to focus. But there were a few slides, for example, slide number 20, where you might have thought about making it bigger. But again, Zoom and online has this function that one can zoom in and look at the slide, so it's no problem. But for a more physical presentation, might be that's something to look at. It was slide 20, I think, mostly that I felt could have been a bit bigger on the axis to read. The other thing, and maybe that's the last point I would make, which is a comment, that in general, in such kind of a talks or when we read an abstract, we are looking at four main things. So you explain very nicely what's the context of this work. You went on and said what people have done. You were very nicely, you said what people have also not done and where are the challenges. And then the fourth thing is that what you have done, that you also explained. But what was missing, and that's connecting back to what Dr. Dutta also said, is that what you have done is how does it fill in the gap between what people have done and what people have not done? And the easier way to do it is to kind of, you have shown that this is a nice work that you have presented. You have made a contribution. But what's this? How is that filling the gaps between what people have done and what people have not done? And one easy way to do that is to just say future work, or the continuity in where will it make a change. And if you followed also the question answers, a couple of the questions were related to what's the bigger picture, when will the change come? So one slider there on where are you involved in that? Because I think the audience was already thinking, is this something you're still working on, or is it something that you have left it at the end of your PhD defense and somebody else is taking over? So that could have been addressed, but it came out through the question answer session. So that's good. But if nobody asked the question, then there would have been some in the audience who would have been still thirsty and thinking, oh, we don't know what he's doing now. Yeah, and with that, I think I would say it was overall a very nice and well-structured and a very good pace of the presentation to follow as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you so much.
Once again, I would like to thank all the reviewers and both our speakers. Thank you for being here. And of course, the audience. You were a very engaging audience. Thank you very much.